Welcome, everybody, to another episode of I Would Say It's Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the managing editor over at SB Nation's Wide Right and Natty Light. Good to be back here on another Tuesday evening for our live show. Iowa State is now 4-0, headed into the bye week after a rough and tumble game against Arkansas State. We'll definitely be breaking that down a little bit because that was far more unpleasant than I think any of us were anticipating or hoping to deal with there. Not going to get too much into previewing Arizona this week. We'll obviously talk a little bit about it because it's just kind of, you can't talk about the previous game without talking about the next game. But we'll do a little bit more in-depth analysis on Arizona next week. We'll do a more in-depth statistical breakdown and all that good stuff. But mainly here to talk about the game last weekend, maybe a few little news bits going around. And then just kind of how Iowa State, the state of things heading into Iowa State's bye week. Obviously, Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona, and I want to say Houston is on a bye this week. So there's first kind of major round of byes in Big 12 play as well. So obviously, big story. Iowa State went down to Jonesboro, Arkansas, beat Arkansas State 24-16. A pretty plucky, straighten out my camera here a second. It's all wonky. There you go. Apparently my wife decided to lay some dishes on her thing. But this is, this was a game that if you were going to draw up a situation in a lab for Iowa State to lose at a G6, I'm not sure you would have come up with anything more diabolical than the game last Saturday, just in terms of the extenuating circumstances, just of everything going into this. So, if you're designing this game for Iowa State to lose, you'd say, okay, you're going to go on the road to a little bit of a difficult location to get to. Obviously had to fly to Memphis, and they stayed in Memphis and then drove up to Jonesboro from Memphis. So you've already got that. We're going to go down to, we're going to go play a G6 that's kind of plucky. They've got a good coach, Butch Jones, good coach. There's a reason he previously coached at like Tennessee and a few other major jobs. And they've got a mobile quarterback that's really experienced. He's been in college forever. He's really mobile. They've got an NFL caliber wide receiver. Also, it's going to be 95 degrees out there, air temperature. So it's going to be about 110, 112 degrees in the field. And we're going to make sure that you're going to do it after you've played four games in 4 weeks. One of them is going to be on a different continent against a rival. And then you're going to come back and play a trap game. And then you're going to play your biggest rival, arguably your biggest rival, at home. And then immediately turn around to go play this game. So you're going to play 2 emotionally exhausting games in 3 weeks, 3 physically exhausting games in 3 weeks because of the practice schedule and the opponents and the travel schedule and all that. And you're going to do this heading into a bye week before you get to Big 12 play. Also, you're arguably the best pass catcher on your team this season, Gabe Burkle, he's going to be out. Also, your kicker, he's going to be hurt. You're also going to be missing a couple other key players, and you're just going to have to figure it out. A lot of that, all of those arrows are pointing in the direction of Iowa State losing. And, but it was interesting because the first part of that game, it seemed to me, based on the interviews that Matt Campbell gave on the field, both, at halftime, coming out of the game, so coming back to the field from halftime, all that, his demeanor was very much like, we're having fun, but, we knew this was going to be a tough game, but we're out there, we're gutting it out. He did not give off the air to me of a coach that's worried or nervous. Because I feel like a lot of coaches, when you see them do those little sideline interviews, you can usually see a little bit of nervous energy, or you can see where they're getting frustrated, or some of them, they're very obviously frustrated. I never got that impression from Campbell in any of those interviews he did. He was very calm, collected, just kind of like, it was kind of like we knew this was going to be a tough game and I'm happy with how we're fighting through it type of thing. Which should, in retrospect, should have given us more it should have given us more comfort than it did, more peace of mind than it did at the time, because we're all panicking, thinking, "Hey, Iowa State was a 21-point favorite. We should be winning this thing by a touchdown or two, going in, at least a touchdown, if not two and a half, 10 points or something like that, going into halftime, so that they can run away with this thing as the game goes on." And the first quarter, you got a lead. It's not like awesome, but you're doing what you can. Basically, you've taken a couple early shots downfield, um, and it seemed to me that the early shots were a very clear indicator that they wanted to get down there and put this game away early. They wanted to get out to like a 2-score lead and just play with a big lead the whole game, so that way they didn't really have they could let their foot off the gas just a little bit to try to not consume so much energy and to try to not get in a bad situation. Unfortunately, I really believe that the entire game flipped completely upside down. The whole game plan went to shit, went to hell in a handbasket as soon as the roughing the punter penalty happened. The defense had already done its job. It was getting, it had put Arkansas State in 3 and out. They weren't doing anything. And all of a sudden, now you give them a first down. And instead of your offense coming out and driving down the field and trying to get a 2-score lead going, your defense is going to have to sit out there a little bit longer than you wanted them to be out there, longer than they wanted to be out there. It's hot as shit. And Arkansas State they're not really moving the ball all that effectively, but they keep converting first downs over and over and over again, just off of Jalen Rayner scrambling out of the pocket and picking up, 5, 10, 12 yards, something like that. Basically just enough for the first down and keep the chains moving, basically. And that's what Arkansas State is really good at. They're pretty good at eating time of possession, basically, and just moving the chains over and over and over again. And they go on that long 9-minute drive, basically, go down, they end up scoring, and it just felt like that put the defense in such a hole, in terms of fatigue and energy levels and even mentality. Maybe it put them in such a deep hole that it felt like the rest of the game they were playing catch up, trying to just get back to neutral instead of being more tired than they should have been or more tired than they were expecting to be. Basically, the whole rest of the game they're playing catch up. Fortunately, after that long, the first, quarter and, basically the first 25 minutes of the game, Iowa State's offense is, really at the first 29 minutes of the game, Iowa State's offense is like, they're moving the ball okay. They're running the ball pretty good, but they're not really sticking with the run, and they're throwing some passes, and Rocco's missing a few throws. Receivers are dropping some passes. But then just out of nowhere with, a minute left or whatever it was, they blast downfield, 4 plays, 29 seconds, and go like 80 yards for a touchdown. They hit Xavier Townsend on a nice seam route and keep the ball moving, basically, and truck. And then they hit Dom Overby over the top in the end zone. Not all dissimilar from that Kansas State game. And yeah, so I think that touchdown drive definitely was like, okay, when they need to turn it on, when they need to, assert physical dominance over Arkansas State, they can do it. That's what that told me. Unfortunately, coming back out of half, Arkansas State gets the ball and they go on another long drive. Now, granted, I don't believe they got a touchdown out of that one. Iowa State was able to bottle that up eventually, but it just they kept having to defend these long drives, and they just kept getting behind over and over and over again. In the stamina game, basically, and it's just, had you not given up that roughing the punter penalty and had to deal with that 9-minute drive, maybe instead of that defending for 9 minutes there, the offense can put together a 5-minute drive, give the defense a breather, get some more points, and, you're in good shape. So, yeah, that third quarter drive, 14 plays, 50 yards, almost 6 minutes. Not the 9 minutes or the 8 minutes of what the one at the end of the second quarter was. Um, but it's still a really long drive. Fortunately, like eventually they kind of got things under control. The next drive, Iowa State went 3-and-out, but then the next drive they got Arkansas State into a 3-and-out. Then Iowa State starts driving. They're moving down the field, and they get down into the red zone. And I will chalk this up to another fatigue play, basically another thing that happened because everybody's just exhausted and tired. Is Rocco hits Ben Bramer out on the left side. I don't think it was on an out route or I think it might have been a hitch route even. Catches it, or he tries to catch it. He tries to catch it with his body, basically, instead of getting his hands out and catching it like you're supposed to, like this. He just tries catching it right up against his body. It bounces up, and he kind of like tries to catch it again, and accidentally bats it over his head directly into the hands of an Arkansas State defender behind him. And it's like, Iowa State's only hanging on to a 1-point lead here, a 17-16 lead. And it just feels like I was like, oh, God, they're going to go down. They're going to score. And we're all going to have a bad time. And it was so frustrating because Rocco, he was rough early, but was ultimately making lots of good throws that the receivers absolutely had to catch. Chase Soul dropped one. I think Eskelson dropped one. Yeah, Ben Bramer had that one. It would have been nice to have Gabe Burkle out there. I mean, I agree with the decision to not, run him out there and have him potentially turn a very minor injury into a major one. That seems silly. And you have the tight end depth that you should be able to handle it. Tyler Moore did actually a very good job instead for Gabe Berkeley. Had like 2 catches for like 58 yards or something like that. Had 2 very, very long catches. Really nice, catch and run type deals. So he did a good job in, filling in for Burkle, but Ben Bramer's got to catch that. I think, 99 times out of 100, he does catch that. I just think the guys were just so exhausted. I think that's just what they were, that it's just how it was going to go. The next drive, though, Arkansas State drives down once again, and they just keep they get down there and they commit. They score, it gets called back for a penalty. They score again, it gets called back for another penalty. And then they commit another penalty, and it was like 4th and goal, or it was like 3rd and goal from like the 26 or something like that. And then they stopped them. And, from there, Iowa State got the ball back. They were able to go down. Rocco put together a really nice, I'm looking at ESPN's drive. I got to show you this ESPN's drive report, like drive summary, is just complete nonsense. Let me look. I want to show you this, how bad it is. Let's see if I can get it to come up here. Yeah. So they go punt. Iowa State's got a touchdown, but they did miss the extra point. Then you've got touchdown Arkansas State, and suddenly it jumps up to 25. Then it's touchdown Iowa State, and suddenly it's 25-10 Iowa State, and it goes 25-10 into half. Now it's coming out of half at 17-13. and then Arkansas State gets a field goal, and it's 17-16 here. And I don't know, this is a mess. And then Arkansas State gets a touchdown on 18 plays here, but their score doesn't change. So that's kind of wild. It's a disaster. I in my head, I know how this game went, but this ESPN drive summary is just scrambling my brain right now. But long story short, Cooper Alexander did have a couple of nice catches as well. He also made a kind of a bad freshman mistake too. He caused Rocco to miss the throw, but basically he was supposed to have an option zone, and he went into he basically, instead of sitting in it where he should have, he moved out, as soon as the defender left. It was kind of a weird freshman mistake, but that's something I can get caught on tape. But anyways, I think I tweeted out at the end of the third quarter that I said fourth quarter Rocco needs to show his face, like badly needs to show his face, and show his face. He did. They drove right down. They just kind of marched down the field. They did it like a little bit faster than I was kind of hoping they were gonna. But he had a little kind of a really nice catch actually to Chase Soul there for a little bit. Carson Brown a nice catch, and then Rocco threw the pass of his damn life to Xavier Townsend, which I want to give a special shout out to Xavier Townsend, who had a really, really great day. I would absolutely categorize it as a breakout performance for Xavier Townsend in an Iowa State uniform. Caught a couple really nice deep passes, did a really, really great job. Let me see. I think I've got the video here. Let me pull this up. I mean, this is an elite ball. So this is kind of small. Let me see. Is there a way I can blow that up? Probably too big. Let me see here. Does this look crazy if I do that? Yeah, it does. I might not be able to do anything with this, but anyways, we're going to watch it small because that's what I got. I mean, you can see right in the breadbasket. I mean, that's one of the best throws of Rocco Beck's career right there. Nice little 3-step drop, sling it, bang. Did it in stride in the breadbasket right over his shoulder. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. That's about as good as a throw gets me. That is a full-on, there's not an NFL quarterback is not throwing a better ball than that. That is the ball that Joe Burrow throws or that Pat Mahomes throws or something like that. I mean, that is a high-end NFL quality throw there. And absolutely, I think Michael got it exactly right. As soon as he threw that, big sigh of relief. And from there, it just felt like, okay, they're in control. They're doing something. Rocco's here. Abu Sama had a couple nice runs as well, broke off one long run, and then actually broke off like an 87-yard touchdown run that got called back. I think that was on the last drive of the game. Yeah, Abu Sama run for no gain. That run for no gain went 87 yards to the house, unfortunately. But they just punched it in. The Iowa State running game was generally pretty successful throughout the day. They were pretty regularly gashing Arkansas State. I think it's one of those, in the end, like it didn't feel good. And it just felt like Iowa State was playing behind all the day. But if you really look at these stats, I mean, they outgained them by 80 yards, outrushed them and outpassed them. They outpassed them on fewer attempts, 10.6 yards per attempt versus 6.7. Iowa State's interception was kind of bullshit versus, or fluky, I should say, where Arkansas State's was Trey Bell making an outrageous diving catch down the field. I mean, shout out to him. That was an unbelievable job by them here. And frankly, a nice little breakout performance by Trey Bell as well. But, Iowa State averaging 6 yards a carry on the ground. Statistically, you would look at this and say, okay, Iowa State kind of owned this game. They were much more efficient. Now, the 20 first downs to 20 first downs would be a fairly decent clue that they both had roughly the same total offensive output in general, like as far as points go. But, I mean, if you look at the rate stats here, Iowa State is just so much more efficient all the way across the board. And that's what makes this a little bit frustrating, because it really did feel like Iowa State was the better team, like clearly the better team all day. 99% post-game win expectancy via Connolly, which, so like that's your thing that Iowa State really did, like, in all ways but the final score. I mean, they blew out Arkansas State in every way but the final score, which is a really crazy statement to say because it sounds like just the most like moral victory coping thing of all time. But I mean, truly, Iowa State was head and shoulders better than Arkansas State on Saturday, and just in terms of just how good they were. But unfortunately, that special teams mistake, they put together, they took the ball out of Iowa State's hands. Basically, they did a great job of taking the ball out of Rocco Beck's hands. But I mean, if you look at these like plays here, Carson Hansen had a 38-yard run. Abu Sama had a 44-yard run. Townsend had a 44-yard catch. Tyler Moore had a 31-yard catch. Carson Brown had a 31-yard catch. Overby had the 27-yard touchdown. All of these guys, I would say, broke off a good chunk of big plays. But I think it was just a little deceiving because those big plays came in bunches. Like it was the drive at the end of the second half. It was the drive in the fourth quarter. But intermittent, in the intermediate drives or the intermittent drives, they were kind of duds. They didn't really do anything. There was the drops, the missed throws. But the running game was pretty regularly just gashing them and just getting what they need to. Abu Sama had his best game. I mean, you don't see a lot of stats there, but he was a holding call away from that being 150 yards, basically 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. And, so, that's probably his best game since, I don't know, Baylor last year, Kansas, something, or not Baylor. No, Baylor last year was Jalen Jackson. I'm trying to think. Abu had an okay game. Oh, Houston, he had a decent game. This was probably his best game since Houston last year. So, and it seems like he's finally starting to uncork it a little bit. Busting off a big run like that can do a lot for a guy like him. That's just a home run hitter, and just seeing it so that he, reminding himself that he can still do that stuff. So, when you see this kind of like statistical dominance here, versus, Jalen Raynor like had most of their rushing yards. Chauncey Cobb caught like a bunch of short passes. He had the 135-yarder there, but like for the most part, like they didn't really take the top off of Iowa State's defense or anything like that. I mean, credit should be given to Arkansas State for Arkansas State executed the game plan to beat Iowa State as about as well as you could. And, the game plan to beat John Hickok's defense is to not get over, not to overextend yourself, not to get overconfident, or, to get too risky, and just take what the defense gives you. If they give you 5 yards, take 5 yards. If they give you 10, take 10. If they give you 2, take the 2. And Arkansas State did a great job of doing that. Jalen Raynor escaped the pocket, picked up what he could with his legs, made a couple guys miss, and did a good job. He really didn't force any throws. The one pick ended up being a pretty bad overthrow on a deep ball, but it was still one-on-one coverage. Like, it wasn't an unreasonable pass to throw. It was just kind of it's a one-on-one. Trey Bell's a good corner and he overthrew it type of thing. Other than that, you didn't really see him force any passes. There wasn't really much of else that like it seemed like Iowa State should have got a hand on or should have picked off or anything like that. He did a good job managing the game, which is what you expect out of, I think he's a 5th-year senior. He's been around for a minute. And God, he's only a junior? Really? I lied. He's a junior. But it's at least what you expect out of an upperclassman. And shout out Jalen Raynor. He's a nice looking junior. He's a nice quarterback, and probably the best running quarterback that Iowa State's going to face this year. Probably. Brent Sorsby's pretty good, but he's a good runner. He's really not a great thrower. And Jalen, I would put Jalen Raynor and Brandon Sorsby like really pretty much right in the same bucket. Maybe Jalen Raynor's a little bit better, but there's same bucket basically. But that's your best quarterback that you're gonna best running quarterback that you're gonna face probably until, I would say, probably Sam Leavitt. I guess I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to watch BYU this year, but I'm not sure if their quarterback's doing a lot of running. But overall, it felt ugly. It felt bad. It was not a fun. It wasn't a fun game to watch. It wasn't, I'm sure it wasn't what a lot of people were hoping to see out of that game. But in the end, I think you got to look at it the same way that it appears that Matt Campbell is looking at this, which is, okay, so Bear Bachmeier is second on their team in rushing attempts for BYU, but he's not very effective. But anyway, so it seemed to me as though Matt Campbell's mindset going into this was, this is a tough game. We're in a tough spot. We've been dealt a tough hand, with the travel and the opponents, the schedule so far. Uh, you know, Arkansas State's a plucky team. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a good receiver. They're not a great defense, but they've got good team speed anyways, as Matt Campbell put it. Just, it was one of those where I think the program was relatively happy to just go down and get a win, play as well as they can, but go down, get a win, get out type of thing. Get to the bye week undefeated, and that's your success. And they did that. I mean, they got to 4-0. The fourth was not super satisfying, but most people, I think even most Cyclone fans, I mean, there's a plenty of them that had us at 4-0 because we kind of like, we're going to beat Kansas State. We always beat Kansas State, and Iowa's going to be bad this year. And, otherwise they're 2 cupcakes. The path of logic to say they're going to be 4-0 was fairly straightforward. But I think a lot of people have been Iowa State fans for a long time. They hedge their bets. They're like, well, we'll lose one out of Kansas State or Iowa, get to the break 3-1 type of thing. And then you're in good shape. 2-2 if something really went wrong, but you're still not really out of anything at that point. I would say most people were in the 3-1 camp. I would say it's 4-0. They're number 12 in the AP poll. They're probably, they might drop down a little bit this week because they're not playing and somebody will win, though somebody will win a big game, but so they might drop down to 13 or 14 or something like that, just by virtue of somebody winning. But you're in the top 15, you're 4-0, you're coming back home to Jack Trice Stadium after a bye week. You've got time to do what you got to do, to get healthy, to get rested, to get back on track, and to feel like you're, in the middle of a normal season again. And this is a great opportunity for Iowa State to just recharge, which I think it seemed to me had everything gone to plan and they've been able to take a normal drive in the second quarter instead of giving up that long drive after the roughing the punter. Had it all gone to plan, that game, I think that game goes much different than it did. And they don't give up maybe they go on a longer drive, even if they go 3 and out on offense again, that's still breaking up the defensive possessions. You can keep them fresh. And then we're singing a different tune if that one play doesn't happen. You got to remember that coming out of that game, Iowa State, generally speaking, played fairly well at Arkansas State. They won their clunker, but I shouldn't say they played fairly well. They could have played better, but their, like I said, their rate stats look pretty good, and there's enough to build on from that to say, okay, we've got a few things we've got to clean up, but they're fixable. I don't think we saw anything this past week that feels like a long-term problem. The special teams was bad. Special teams on Saturday was bad all the way around, multiple facets. The only thing that could potentially become a long-term thing for Iowa State is the kicker situation, which we'll talk about here in a second. Tyler Perkins dropping the ball in the end zone. It's not going to happen again. The roughing the punter, they'll probably be, they can coach that up. They can be more selective with when they use that. I'm not expecting that to be a long-term trend or anything like that. The special teams thing was not great, but I don't think there was anything I saw us outside of the kicker injury that was like a long-term concern. Defense was fine. I mean, they took longer than we probably wanted to adjust and to start, get a spy on Jalen Raynor to kind of corral his run game. It probably took a little bit longer than people wanted it to, or were hoping it would. But I think Iowa State was making a value proposition there, where they were given the option of potentially letting a team that they want to be aggressive. They want to take shots downfield, and they've got an NFL receiver in Corey Rucker. Do you let a team like that get a couple big plays, get some momentum, and maybe they end up busting one and they get a touchdown out of it? Do you do that, or do you sit back, be okay with Jalen Raynor running a little bit, and they're going to go on long drives, but you're going to roll the dice that eventually they're going to have a miscue. They're going to, one play, a third down is going to be poorly executed. They're going to make a mistake someplace. And, that's how you can stop your drives, basically. And I think that was the value proposition that Iowa State was faced with. And they chose, let's not let this team that's fresher than us, that has good team speed, that has big play capability, let's not let them, keep in this with deep shots downfield with big plays. Let's make them earn this thing. Like, if they're going to beat us, they need to do it by playing the way we want them to play and executing like perfectly all game. And I think that was the dilemma they were faced with. Cause I think for Iowa State, it's, if you put a spy on Jalen Raynor, do you feel as though you can play adequate coverage in the back end with one less defender? I mean, eventually Iowa State, I think, just kind of came to the conclusion that they had to take that a little bit of a gamble with that and put a spy out there and deal with it a little bit better. And fortunately, it worked out okay. They got the Trey Bell interception and all that, and they eventually slowed Arkansas State down. But early in the game, I can't necessarily blame them for not just immediately switching to using a spy on this. I think that's what Arkansas State was kind of trying to do. They were trying to get extra guys out of coverage so that way they could take a deep shot and try to hit on a couple big plays and see if you can catch lightning in a bottle with that, and then make Iowa State play from behind and try to, counter big plays with long drives, which, as anybody can, a lot of people can, you've seen plenty of football in your life, is that, a team that's connecting on explosive plays is harder to keep up with is hard to keep up with if your only way of scoring is by methodically marching down the field. Now, Iowa State ended up putting together a number of good explosive plays through the game, but that's the choice that they were weighed with. And I think if I was John Haycock, would I have switched to using a spy earlier in the game? Maybe a little bit earlier. Probably. I think I probably would have done it earlier, like in the third quarter, like when they were on that second long drive. But I can't really blame them for not choosing to do that earlier, because they needed to get to a spot where they felt like an explosive play wasn't going to force them to play catch up all game, and they could get out to a lead or something like that. And then once you're playing with like an 8-point lead, like they were eventually able to get as an 8-point lead. Once you have that, and even an explosive play and a 2-point conversion still gives you a tie game, you can take a better risk with that, and you can spy, and you can be like, okay, we still trust our secondary to cover down the field, but we really want to bottle this up to make life a little bit more difficult for them, and basically force them to take and connect on a deep shot against what we believe is a very good secondary. You have more insurance. You have your insurance built in there later in the game once you've got that 8-point lead, and I think that's when they switched. Had they had that full 8-point or more lead in the third quarter, I think they switch. I think they switch to putting a spy on Jalen Raynor. I think they get a little bit more aggressive in trying to attack him versus basically just sitting back and letting him just kind of nickel and dime you down the field a little bit. I think they switch earlier if the offense is able to get one more score at some point earlier in the game. So, like I said, it was frustrating in real time, but having a chance to kind of reflect on it and go back and look at it, I think they probably did the right thing. When you're weighing risk and reward based on what you think they can do and what you're not sure if you can defend, when in doubt, always take away the big play and make them drive the field and make them consistently execute. Credit goes to Arkansas State. For the most part, they did. They executed over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually, the gamble for Iowa State paid off. They didn't execute on a few plays. They got the ball back. They score. Now you can get more aggressive. So I think Iowa State did about as good a job as they could working with what they had to work with in terms of fatigue and injuries and the flow of the game, what Arkansas State was doing, what they were giving them. Overall, I think while it was a rough game to watch, I think it was a well-coached football game. because I think a poorly coached football team folds in that. They let the penalty haunt. They let the penalty kind of haunt them. They let it kind of linger over the game plan. Maybe they make a mistake. Maybe Rocco doesn't hit that throw down the sideline. I think Iowa State winning that game is a sign that the floor is fairly high for Iowa State. The middle of the roster is very solid. It's a well coached football team. They don't commit a lot of penalties, and I think you can come out of that game finding some foundational things that were really good that Iowa State can build on and be like, okay, this is our platform going forward. This is how we're gonna win. DQ says, I think they thought they could get a 10 to 14 point lead and force them to play differently, but the offense kept dropping ball. I think you're dead on right there. I couldn't agree more. I think that's exactly what happened. I think the plan was to get out to a 2-score lead, which is why they were taking shots early on. First play of the game, they take a shot. I think that is why they were getting really aggressive with the passing game early on. They wanted to get a big lead, and they wanted to be able to play with a multi-score lead, be okay with being a little more aggressive, and be able to play where you're not terrified of them hitting a deep ball or breaking off a explosive play. And I think that the drops, a couple of the missed throws, all that kind of went to hell in a handbasket. And then they just kind of had to play this kind of dirty grind out game. I think that's why the game was the way it was. They had a path to victory that included them just playing with a good lead the whole game. And the other path to victory is we're going to have to play a close game, and we're going to have to out execute these guys. And over a long enough timeline, Iowa State out executed Arkansas State, and they were out talented Arkansas State. They did a good job. They did a good job winning a game that was basically built for them to lose. And I think that's worth something. So I think for Cyclone fans, I think you should look at that game as a situation where Iowa State could have, and in past year they could have, maybe should have, and in past years absolutely would have lost to a G6 on the road, and not ruined, but really put a big damper on what is otherwise a stellar start to this season. So we don't need the doom and gloom. This is still a good football team. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to figure out, the question is, how good is the team? How good are the people you've beat? But we'll talk about them in a little bit. Now, the thing maybe that's certain, the only real thing I think that's kind of lingering right now, aside from I would say there's two things that are lingering. One is the drops by the receivers and the tight ends in a lot of situations. But the other is that there are a few injuries starting to show up. Carson Willich hasn't been back yet. I don't know if he played against South Dakota or not, but the Kansas State game, he played really, really well, and he's been kind of hurt ever since. Gabe Berklow is out. It sounds like he's going to be back. It sounds like he'll be fine. I think Cale Brazina played on Saturday. As far as I know, he's fine. Kind of the two big ones right now, I think, are Kyle Conradi, who came out, and he when he missed that field goal, he looked visibly uncomfortable. Like he looked like he was hurt. He kicked that injured, and he went to the tent and medical tent, came back out and didn't come back out for the rest of the game, or didn't kick for the rest of the game. And I don't know what the injury is. Hopefully he's fine, because he is absolutely a weapon for Iowa State on special teams. He's a guy where, if you end the drive at the 40-yard line, you're fine with him plopping back there and taking a 55-yarder. You're okay with that because he can make them. And he's pretty consistent at making them, actually. So it's such a weapon for Iowa State to have a kicker like that. I don't know when he's going to be back. Hopefully it's soon. I don't want to throw out any rumors, because it's absolutely not confirmed. The one that I've heard floating around is not great. I don't mean to cause panic. I don't know, and I can't confirm it myself or anything like that. And we'll know more. I don't know if we'll know the full truth next week, but we'll know more next week on the injury report. we'll find out what the deal is with Kyle. I'm sure it'll just say lower body injury out or something like that, out or doubtful or something. But at least we'll have some. If he's if he's out for Arizona, I'm gonna have a small alarm bell going off in my head. Just like, okay, if he's out, then he might not be back for a little bit. If he's doubtful, maybe that means he's a couple weeks away. Who knows? We don't know exactly how much to trust these injury reports yet, but it's a point of concern because Jace Gilbert was hurt in the first game, and they had another walk-on out there. I couldn't even tell you his name. I mean, if it comes down to Iowa State needing to hit a 40-yard field goal, I mean, if Jace Gilbert's not out there, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you do. If Iowa State has 4th and 6 on the 35-yard line, they're probably going for it. The question is how close do they need to be to kick a field goal? And when you keep playing these close games, it's absolutely meaningful. So we'll see. The other one, which is injured as giant hog. The other one, I have no idea how concerned to be about this, but Jontez Williams did not play most of the second half, or maybe the entire second half against Arkansas State. I have not heard anything about what his deal is. Not even just like a little like rumor mill thing. I haven't heard anything about what Jontez Williams thing is. For what it's worth, Jeremiah Cooper has been very, very good at corner so far. Trey Bell played really well on Saturday. They've played some other guys over at corner as well that have been, generally speaking, pretty good. If Jontez, Jontez is one of the best corners in college football. You don't want to not have him on the field. But it seems to me that with Trey Bell is now up to speed where if Jontez has to miss a game and you're playing just Jeremiah Cooper and Trey Bell, I think you can survive a game or two like that. I don't think it's that necessarily that big a deal, especially against some of these earlier opponents. If it was like Arizona State or TCU coming up, I would be very concerned just because of how good their passing games are. But we'll see with Arizona. Arizona is a better team for sure than they were last year. No question about it. But do they have the threats outside to warrant worrying having Trey Bell versus Jontez Williams? I don't know. But that's one to keep an eye on. I think they've got guys in the room where if Jontez couldn't go full speed or had to miss a week, I think you can be okay. The secondary is very good. Otherwise, the safeties have been awesome. But obviously want to keep an eye on. To me right now, the big one is Kyle Conradi, because that just changes your kicking game entirely. Carson Willich, we'll see what his deal is. That guy can't. It sucks because he's been a really good player when he's been in. The guy just cannot catch a break on staying healthy. So we'll see, what they can do coming out of that. As far as I know, I would expect Gabe Burkle to be full go for Arizona, or as full go as you can be. So yeah, it's just tough. I mean, you're into the season. You're going to have injuries. This shit's going to happen. It's football. Guys get hurt is what it is. But you're not missing you're not missing an offensive lineman. Trevor Burr came back. I think he played all right on Saturday. You're not missing any major skill players to my knowledge. The defensive line is doing fine. Vontae Malone had a pretty good game last week. Thought he did a good job. Kenny Yogu had another good game as well. So some promise there. But overall, the injury concerns are they pale in comparison to what they had to deal with last year. But a couple guys, the couple guys that we do know of that are hurt are concerning, especially the kicker. I guess I haven't heard anything like it. As far as I know, I think Ben Bramer's fine. But again, we'll know more. We'll have more clarity next week with the injury report for the Arizona game. So, we'll see. But heading into this bye week, it's obviously the first one is get recharged, get healthy. You can clean up special team stuff. The receivers can clean up catches. They can. They have good enough hands to not be dropping balls like this. Things like this can be cleaned up. It just takes time on the jugs machine. That it's got to be times. It's got to be reps out there on the practice field with Rocco and the other quarterbacks and things like that. This bye week needed to happen at the end of the first quarter against Arkansas State is when it needed to happen. But they're in about as good a spot as you could realistically have asked them to be in. They've shown that they can win tough games. They can win games multiple ways. They've found, it seems to me like they've found good starters and good depth at pretty much every position. Wide receiver, now we need to see 2 games in a row from Xavier Townsend. He had his game against Arkansas State, but is he going to put it together against Arizona? Is Ben Bramer going to be, is he going to drop another pass? I'm not suddenly concerned about Ben Bramer's hands, but just is he going to bounce back and be the Ben Bramer we know he can be? The receivers are probably the only ones right now where you're looking at is like they need to find a dude that can be a dude every week versus like, oh, this week it's Carson Brown. This week it's Dom Overby. This week it's Brett Eskelson. This week it's Xavier Townsend. Maybe next week it's Chase Soule. Somebody needs to step up and be the dude. Yeah, I think any one of Overby, Eskelson, Townsend, Soule, I think any of those 4 have the skill, athleticism, and size, and or size to do that, to be the guy, to be a guy that can get 8-10 targets a game, something like that. I don't think you need 10, but like 6 to 8 targets a game type of thing where they can just kind of feed him the ball a little bit. Maybe it's Xavier Townsend, get him on screens and jet sweeps and things like that. Or maybe they found him on, maybe the hitting him, deep down the field in this game was like, okay, we can use this now. We can get Xavier Townsend in the seam. They need to figure out this receiver situation, find a couple guys that they can rely on. It's still good to rotate and keep guys moving in and out and getting guys more experience, getting guys more touches, find, different combinations for the defense to account for, all of that. But when it's third down, it's 3rd and 6. You need to find a receiver that you can throw to. They've got tight ends. I'm not discounting the tight ends. Gabe Burkle and Ben Bramer, especially Gabe Burkle, has been amazing this season. I think I would have to imagine if there was like a Mackey Awards semifinalist or finalist list coming right now, Gabe Burkle would have to be on it. But just having tight ends on third down is not going to be good enough. They need to find a receiver that they can reliably go to. If it were like my choice, you'd have one of the bigger body guys, Chase Soule, maybe Dom Overby. One of those guys becomes your third down guy. I think Chase Soule seems like a great target. It seems like a great candidate for that role, just being your third down guy. But they need to grow. They need to be more consistent. They need to do a lot of things. There's clearly talent there. There's clearly athleticism there. They just need to all put it together, and they need to do it multiple games in a row. Receivers and D-backs need to grow by late. I think the D-backs in general, the safeties, I think the secondary in general has been pretty good. There's still, the safeties are on the young side, but I think for where they're at in their careers, I think they've been very good. And most of the mistakes that they've been making have been very much like freshman type mistakes. This is a great opportunity for them to be able to sit down, really go through some film, get some stuff figured out, review tendencies, review things they got beat on, like, looking at the Kansas State film and saying, hey, we got beat on this double move. We can watch this for later. Things like that. Film room can clean up a lot of the young parts of the safeties. Basically, the corners have been otherwise pretty good. I think the main position group that needs to get something figured out this week is the wide receiver room. I think the defensive line is slowly kind of coming into their own. I think they're starting to figure some stuff out. Dom Orange has been awesome. Vontae Malone he was pretty good. Tomatilla McDonough has been good. I don't think he played much on Saturday, so hopefully he's okay. But then Akene Eziogu had some good moments, had a good game against Kansas State. They've been finding some guys. They just need to keep building on that. Wide receiver needs to find some guys. Not that there's not for lack of talent or athleticism, but because they just need to find guys that can be there every single game and be the guys that they can rely on. So that's really the agenda for the bye week, other than just recharging, getting healthy, all of that. Like I said, we'll talk more about Arizona next week too. We'll get more into them because I think, Iowa State will probably still be a 10-point favorite, something like that, something in that neighborhood against Arizona. I'm not sure if the lines have come out for that yet or not, but this is a game. It's a game they should win at home, but Arizona's a plucky team with some good players, especially good quarterbacks. So, it'll be something worth, we're going to want to dive into it a little bit for sure. And we will do that next week. But I do want to talk a little bit about just the state of the conference, because boy, howdy, has it been all over the place. You've had a few teams be way under expectations. Kansas State has been horrible, really, really bad. I think, and it's gotten bad enough to the point where I honestly believe that the Kansas State team that Iowa State played in the first game of the season in Ireland, I think that was the team that they it was still a version of Kansas State that was eventually going to be really good and contend for a Big 12 title. It was still a version of that team that could do that. Since then, things have gotten very, very bad. Avery Johnson looks terrible. The offense looks terrible. The defense isn't doing much of anything. The offensive line is bad. Things are really, really falling apart in Manhattan, Kansas. Is it going to be enough to cause Chris Kleiman to, step down and retire? I don't know. But I do know that all of a sudden their road is pretty difficult. And right now, I think they've got an uphill battle. They're going to have to pull some upsets to make a bowl game this year. And, it's a Kansas State's a program that I think people expect to be good. So when Kansas State is not good, I don't want to say it ruins the image of the Big 12, because there's plenty of other teams in the conference that can be good and still maintain the reputation of the Big 12. But, them expecting, they were projected to be one of the contenders at the top of the conference, and then they fall down. It was basically right now they're doing what Utah did last year. That's exactly what's happening. They're just Utah from last year. And I believe Utah did not make a bowl game last year either. So who knows? Maybe every year they're just going to be a Utah where someone is going to be up there. They're going to be projected to be one of the favorites, and then they're just going to ship the drawers. And then you've got Arizona State has been I think they still look like a decent enough team, but I think, as we predicted on a number of Wide Right podcasts, as I told you here on this show, that it was going to be more difficult for Arizona State this time around. Not just because you lose Cam Scatterbo, who was your all bailout. You could bail you out of any situation at all. Give him the ball and he will bail you out of any tough situation. But also, Sam Leavitt has tape. People can watch Sam Leavitt and know what's going on. So you have a running back that he's fine. He's not bad, but he's fine. But he's not Cam Scatterbo. He can't do what Cam Scatterbo did. And they've got Jordan Tyson. They've got a couple good weapons for him. And the defense is fine. But teams have tape on Sam Leavitt now, and Arizona State has looked very vulnerable up to this point. Maybe they'll get it figured out, but right now Arizona State's not quite as good as people thought they were going to be. They're certainly not the runaway favorites to win, to be in the conference title game like they were before. But we'll see what they do. But we have some other teams, and Baylor has been rough. They might be okay, but this could be Dave Aranda's last season in Waco. Then you have a couple other teams that have been better than expected. Actually, another team that's been disappointing is Colorado. I don't know if anyone was expecting a lot out of Colorado, but they've been worse than people thought they were going to be. But, Utah was kind of a wild card. I think people thought that they might be good, but Utah so far has been very good. Their offense seems to be moving pretty good with Devin Dampier. Texas Tech has not played anybody with a pulse. Those two face off this week, and that'll be a really nice indicator for where those two teams are at. Because Texas Tech has not played anybody at all. They've been smoking people, but they haven't played anybody with a pulse. So we'll see what they look like against Utah. But, that's a team that's expected to be right there at the top. right now with it's the top of the conference right now is projected to essentially be Utah, Texas Tech, and Iowa State. And Utah and Texas Tech play this weekend. So we'll find out. And Iowa State doesn't play either of them at all this season, which is kind of funny. Um, so we'll see there. Cincinnati has been very mediocre. Arizona is a team that's been better than people thought. They were pretty bad last year. The defense was terrible. They had some trouble moving the ball. This year so far, the defense has been much better. Now, granted, once again, Arizona has been the beneficiary of not really playing anybody right now. Kansas State should have been a somebody, but right now it seems like they're kind of like a nobody. Arizona State probably should have won that game by multiple touchdowns because Kansas State is just awful. So right now, Arizona has not really gotten a very good test. So we'll see. They've got a good running back. Noah Fifita is a good quarterback. Like I said, but we'll preview more of them next week. TCU right now, Josh Hoover has been as good as advertised. TCU looks like a really nice team. Their schedule doesn't look quite as daunting as it used to, but it's still a tough enough schedule that they've got to put some really nice games together. But right now it seems there does seem to be a tier one starting to form. Utah, Texas Tech, Iowa State. Maybe we'll see if this game, if one of those two teams, if one of Texas Tech or Utah blows the other one out this weekend, the one that gets blown out probably falls down a tier a little bit because we're probably going to look at them and like, maybe they weren't good as we thought, as good as we thought. And then maybe TCU slides up there if they do good. If they, let's see, who does TCU play this weekend? TCU plays, or are they on bye too? TCU's got SMU this weekend, so they're not in conference yet. But they've got SMU this weekend, Arizona State next weekend. They're at Arizona State. Then they've got Colorado at home, at Kansas State, which at the beginning of the season looked like a terrible game, but now it looks fine. They got Baylor at home, which at the beginning of the season, was going to be a tough game. Doesn't look as tough now. At West Virginia, which might be a tougher game than you thought. I think they're still going to be like TCU will be a 10, 12 point favorite there, but West Virginia seems pretty plucky. It seems like Rich Rod maybe will have something going there. Then they've got Iowa State at home, which that's going to be that could be a Titan clash there. That can be a really big one. Then they've got on the road at BYU, which is a tough game. On the road at Houston, which is a very tough game. And then they've got Cincinnati at home. So they've got a stretch there where they've got Iowa State at BYU at Houston. That's a tough 3 games right there for TCU. So, if they can come out of that 2-1, they're going to be there, but we'll see. They've also got a tough road, but the tricky part here with Iowa State though is that Kansas State being bad or at least becoming bad doesn't help perception of Iowa State because now we don't know how good that Kansas State win was. And you beat Iowa, and it seems like Iowa is going to probably limp to 7-5. Probably they're gonna blow a few teams out. They're going to get blown out by a few teams, and that's just what it's going to be. Seems like the schedule is largely pretty well decided for Iowa, unless something major changes. Their schedule is either we're going to beat this team by 3 touchdowns or we're going to lose by 3 touchdowns. It's going to be one of those two. Like this weekend, they've got Rutgers. They're going to win by a few touchdowns, probably. So I was turning into a fairly unimpressive win. South Dakota seems like they're not very good. Granted we blew them out, but South Dakota doesn't seem like a win that matters at all. Hopefully Arkansas State does something, but right now with just how well how poorly Kansas State is playing and how very below, mediocre, below average Iowa is, now you have to start at least a little bit asking how good actually is Iowa State. And I think we can find out a little bit, at least this, against Arizona, who we believe to be not a great team, but a competent football team with a good quarterback. And, it'd be a good test to see. It'd be a good barometer just to see where Iowa State really sits. If they can put together a really good dominant performance against Arizona, in a couple weeks, I think that goes a long ways to sort of restoring everybody's faith that okay, Iowa State is a team to contend with, and they're going to be there at the end of the season type of thing. So But this weekend you've got Notre Dame, a second loss. They have to win out, period, if they're going to be in the playoff. I really don't think they should be. I mean, the rest of their schedule is terrible. But when they play at USC in a few weeks, you're really rooting for USC, because if USC beats them, they'll have 3 losses. They're completely done. Clemson's got a couple losses. They really can't afford to lose another game. And, so there's a couple bid stealers there, basically, that are mostly out of the way for the Big 12, which is good. That gets your champion up a little bit higher and potentially clears the way that let's say you can get 2 10-2 or 11-1 teams into the championship game, and let's say maybe you can finish with 2 11-2 squads after the Big 12 title game. That's a 2-bid league. That's a league that has two teams in, for sure. Two 11-win teams, especially, like if it's Iowa State and Utah, they'll both get into the playoff. So, right now, good weekend for the Big 12. USF lost there, so that dream's kind of, that the Cinderella run there kind of fell apart a little bit. But one of USF and Tulane will be there. They'll probably make the playoff as the G5 or G6 representative. So right now, the Big 12, the best thing that can happen for the Big 12 now is to have the teams that you think are going to be there at the end, have them win. Obviously Utah and Texas Tech, one of them will win, one will lose this weekend. But, you need like Iowa State, Texas Tech, Utah, and TCU to keep winning. And you need them to get to 9-3, 10-2, 11-1, something like that. You need them to get there. So, because I think if you can establish that upper echelon of teams and keep it consistent through the whole season and reduce some of the craziness, let the craziness be between 10-2 teams or 11-1 teams, not 9-3 and 8-4 teams. Don't let the the teams that were sketchy in the non-con sneak their way back up and get in on a tiebreaker. That's how you delegitimize the national image of the conference. So right now you're hoping that those 4 teams, I think, pretty much are that they continue to win, or at least that 3 to 4 teams just win. It doesn't have to be necessarily as far. Maybe you could throw BYU in there. Maybe you could throw in, I don't know, somebody. You could BYU. I think maybe Baylor figures it out. Maybe they can score, but their defense is horrible. So we'll see. It just I think Utah Tech this weekend, I think, is a big one that you should keep an eye on. That'll help us gauge where either of those 2 teams are, because neither of them have played anybody of note. So we'll see. But right now, Iowa State, more importantly, Iowa State is 4-0. They're in the top 15. They will be there again. And when Arizona comes to town, it's a great opportunity to get back going, get the mojo again, and to remind people right now that Iowa State is in first place in the Big 12 and deserves to be there. So we will wrap it up for this week. I really appreciate everybody that was hopping in the chats. I forgot to put the comments on the screen. Wish they would just automatically do that, but really appreciate everybody in the chat, and I try to interact as much as I can. But we will be here again next Tuesday. Obviously, no show this weekend since there's no game, but we'll be back here again next Tuesday at 7 Central, 8 Eastern, and then we'll be back to the pregame, to the post game shows after the Arizona game. Which I think we've got. Did we get a kickoff time for Arizona? It's a night game, so it may be late, or maybe I might do a Sunday morning reaction show, depending on what's all going on there. So either way, everybody have a great rest of your week. Enjoy your bye week. Watch some football this weekend. Enjoy your 4-0 Iowa State Cyclones. Your 4-0 top 15 Iowa State Cyclones, and we'll see you guys again next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.